welcome to this edition of Vantage Point here on News First. I am Shahid Rampati. Well, the government of Sri Lanka has declared the year 2016 as a year for several political changes and a year for political transformation. Well, what are these changes and how will the political landscape of Sri Lanka be transformed? To answer these questions, we are joined by Dr. Jayatilaka, former diplomat and political analyst. Hello, welcome to the show, Dr. Jayatilaka.
Hi, Shaheen.
Dr. Jayatilaka, will these changes be accomplished? Better yet, can they be accomplished?
Better yet, should they be accomplished? But I would say yes, some changes are needed and they can be accomplished provided there is a roadmap which is viable and that the changes are right-sized, that they're neither too big nor too small. I think it can be done. Right now there's some friction, including within government, about the roadmap for political change, for constitutional change. And it's a very interesting situation. The Sri Lanka Freedom Party, which is a component of the government, has produced some amendments. We don't know whether the UNP and the Prime Minister will accept those amendments. It looks like they will. There are new alignments. The SLFP, the joint opposition led by Dinesh Gunawardena, and the JVP, unlikely bedfellows, seem to be taking a common position on how the constitutional change should take place. Not on which changes should take place, but how they should take place. So it's a very interesting situation.
Dr. Jayatilaka, let's switch to President Sirisena's statement in Parliament on the 9th of this month. He said that there are rumors, or rather allegations, that Sri Lanka is seeking advice from foreign countries for the formulation of the constitution. What do you believe on the statement and the rumors?
Well, I think that there's an element of exaggeration, but there is no smoke without a fire, as the cliche goes. I think what has happened is, as Kehlia Ramukwala, former minister, disclosed in Parliament, he was invited. He's a member of one of these constitutional sort of preparatory committees, and he was invited for a discussion in Parliament on this. And when he walked in there, there were specialists from Norway. So Kehlia Ramukwala was wondering what they were doing, addressing parliamentarians in Parliament, not at a seminar outside, on how the constitution should be made. So it's not that there isn't a fire behind the smoke, but maybe there is an exaggerated sense of the foreign engagement in this. Now, as we speak, there is an ongoing seminar in the north where Chief Minister Vigneswaran is presiding over an international seminar on the constitution, on federalism. And representatives from the government of Switzerland are here in the north of Sri Lanka, and the Chief Minister has made a speech himself. He has called for shared sovereignty. Now that's not the job of a Chief Minister, and there are Swiss embassy representatives there. So there is a higher degree of foreign involvement in the constitution making, in the discussion, than at any time in independent Sri Lanka's history. Not since the Solberry Commission has there been any external involvement, not under the SLFP in 70 to 72, not under the United National Party in the making of the 1978 Constitution. None, no external element whatsoever. It was a sovereign decision of the people of Sri Lanka through their elected representative. But now, certainly on the periphery of the process, there is a fairly conspicuous foreign engagement. That's probably not very healthy. It gives it's the wrong optics, and it enables the extremists in the south to say that, you know, this is according to some foreign recipe, which it may not be.
Dr. Jayatilaka, there's also a concern among several parties here, while in the process of formulating the constitution, the unitary status of the government will be compromised. But the President, however, and the Prime Minister has assured that that will not be the case. Now, why is why are these speculations cropping up, in particular by the leader of the joint opposition, Dinesh Gunawardhan, who claimed that the unitary status of the country would be compromised?
Well, I think there the mistake was made by the Honorable Prime Minister, not by President Sirisena, because in his important Sujata Jayawardena Memorial Oration, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe said that the model for constitutional reform, and he went on to say the model for devolution that is being looked at by the experts is that of Austria. Now the PM said this. Now Austria, without any doubt whatsoever, is a federal state. It says so in the opening sentence of the Austrian constitution. So when somebody says Austria is the model for devolution, then you can't really blame anyone else for thinking that this is going to be a federal constitution, it's going to be outside the unitary framework. I mean, you can't have it both ways.
Before we proceed any further with that answer, could you define what the term federal is? I'm pretty sure because many of our viewers are confused what this whole federal state is.
That's very easy, really. There are two types. The broad division is unitary and federal, and unitary subdivides again into unitary states with devolution and unitary states without devolution. Now, in a unitary state, there is one center. It can be an executive president, it can be parliament, it can be a combination of the executive presidency and the parliament. So there is one center which is the repository or two-tier repository, executive presidency, parliament, of the sovereignty of the entire people. So the people are taken as one. In such a state, the center can decide to share power, some measure of power, downwards. There's an apex. So share power downwards with certain units or subunits. So that's devolution. You devolve, you share power outwards and downwards. And you may take it back in case of an emergency. That is Sri Lanka's model. That is the model in Britain, which defines itself as a unitary state, though it doesn't have a formal written constitution. That is the model in China, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, that's one model. France is a unitary state without devolution. I mean, you have municipal elections, but you don't have provinces with that kind of power. Now, the federal model is different. The unitary model says we are all one and the people are one and we are one unit basically, one center, and we share. The federal system says we are a collection of units and we have decided to get together. Now in the United States, at the time of independence, there were several states that got together to form a federation. India was a number of states. Therefore, Indian quasi-federalism is defined as a union of states. And before Britain left India, they insisted on a referendum in each one of the states whether they wanted to be part of India or not, because when they came in, they were separate. So that's why Pakistan seceded. Now, in Sri Lanka, the British never did that on their way out because that's not the Sri Lanka that existed. Ceylon, whatever. So here we don't have a collection of states which say, okay, now we are going to get together and federate, because that is not the situation that existed. And it is almost unheard of that a unitary state turns into a federal state. A federal state is when units want to come together. A unitary state is when there are no such pre-existing units, but you have a decision to share power downward. And unitary states hardly ever become federal states. What unitary states do is it gives more and more power downward and outward while remaining unitary. So that's the basic difference. Another factor that goes into the unitary versus federal thing is the geopolitical realities. if you have a large neighbor, as we do, and you have co-ethnics, as we do, between Tamil Nadu and the north of Sri Lanka, then there is a greater tendency to have a centralized model, because you are afraid of the gravitational tug, especially if there have been incursions over millennia from there. Now, why does the Philippines not call itself federal, though they have regional autonomy from Mindanao? Indonesia, they have regional autonomy in Aceh. But they prefer to remain unitary rather than federal, because they are afraid that, as in the period of colonialism, it would lead to a breakup. So there are many countries that resist calling themselves federal, but they do share power, and I think that's the best solution.
Dr. Jatila, back to the previous question in terms of a certain speculation being raised.
Yeah, and this is because of the Prime Minister's reference to Austria.
Yeah, could you elaborate on the speculation that has been raised in terms of disrupting the unitary state of Sri Lanka?
Well, as I said, if the Prime Minister had not mentioned Austria and said this is the model, and if he had actually said, look, we are looking at unitary states, not Austria, which is a federation, but unitary states in which there's power sharing downward, then nobody would have shouted about this. It is he, and he's not an unintelligent man, he's an intelligent man. He's also fairly well read. So it's not accidental. When he says Austria is the model, you're talking about federalism. And, then immediately somebody is bound to say, look, that's what you're talking about. He should have said, we are looking at power sharing within unitary states, and these are the places we are looking at. And he could have named several places.
However, Dr. Jayatilaka, the President, the Prime Minister and several other government representatives have assured that while saying that the unitary state of Sri Lanka will not be compromised, they have said that even a paragraph on the constitution has not even been looked into. What do you have to say about that?
Well, then they must ask themselves why the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, which is a member of the coalition government, and the JVP, which was a member of the Executive Council after January 8th, have taken a common stand together with Mr. Dinesh Gunawardene as joint opposition in opposing the Prime Minister's roadmap. Now, of course, you can understand why the joint opposition would do that, because they are numerically the largest opposition formation, and of course they would criticize. But why would the Sri Lanka Freedom Party and the JVP do that? That's because there's something radically wrong with the roadmap. Now, what the SLFP and the JVP are saying, and they have been supported by the joint opposition, is the following. By all means, let us have constitutional change. None of us opposes constitutional change. Nobody says the status quo must remain. We all want to look at reform, but the existing constitution has a prescribed method of constitutional change. If you want to change the constitution, you have to go by the existing method for changing the constitution. If you don't, well, the legitimacy of what you're doing is called into question. I mean, you cannot have constitutional change by extra-constitutional or non-constitutional or unconstitutional means. So, what the SLFP, joint opposition, JVP, loose coalition is saying is, stick to the letter and spirit of the existing constitution. Don't try any, any shortcuts. No tricks. And that's why they have proposed amendments. They haven't stopped with just criticizing the Prime Minister. They have engaged constructively, which I think is an extremely healthy thing. And they have said, look, these are our amendments. We are not opposing this. But these are our amendments to what you have proposed. Now it's up to the Prime Minister to take those on board. If he does not, his problem is not going to be with the joint opposition and Dinesh and Vasu and so on. His real problem is going to be with his coalition partners, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, and his former allies, the JVP. He already had some crosstalk with the JVP in his speech, an important speech on January 9, introducing the idea of a new constitution. He went off script and attacked Anura Kumara Dissanayake. Now, that's not really the right way to get a consensus when you're starting on a new experiment. But he did so. Now, why did he do that? I mean, somebody could say it's a temperamental thing. I don't think so. I think there was an issue behind it and beneath it. And that is that the Prime Minister, perhaps together with the TNA, had decided on a roadmap which was outside the norms and practices and experience of the existing constitution, and the JVP opposed it. So did the SLF.
Speaking of the TNA, Dr. Jayathilaka, what is their stance on this matter?
Well, I agree with President Sirisena's heavy hint in his speech on January 9th, introducing the idea of constitutional transformation, when he said that we should solve this, I mean, more or less said that we need to solve this while Mr. Sambandhan is the leader of the Tamil people. And I have always held that view. Mr. Sambandhan is a very distinguished parliamentarian, and I think we should go along with that. But we do have a problem. The problem is not only with the Chief Minister, Mr. Vigneswaran, who is presenting some really off-the-books proposals at this seminar on federalism. We have a problem within the TNA with Mr. Sridharan, MP for Jaffna. Mr. Sridharan gave an interview to the Sunday Veera Kesari, very renowned paper. I believe it was on the 3rd of January. And in that, Mr. Sridharan, who represents Jaffna, by the way, said, we need a federal constitution with Tamil sovereignty. Now, we're talking about different sovereignties. Nobody, the Sinhalese don't have sovereignty in Sri Lanka. Muslims don't have sovereignty. The people of Sri Lanka have sovereignty. All the people. So, Mr. Sridharan says we need federalism with Tamil sovereignty. The United States and India played a role in defeating our struggle, by which he means the war. Therefore, they promised us federalism. If they are unable to do that, they must create the conditions that will enable us to separate. Now, this is Mr. Sridharan, TNA, MP for Jaffna, in the Sunday Veera Kesari. So now that's very dangerous. If that is the way the TNA is headed, or at least an important wing of the TNA, and as I said, I'm not even talking about Chief Minister Vigneswaran, then we are going to have political clashes. Because there's only one way to get this done. The only way is to have the broadest common denominator. Something that everybody can agree on. Everybody is for constitutional change. Nobody says that we should not look at the north-south axis, that we must not try to solve this problem once and for all. So everybody is on board. But to keep everybody on board, you need a solution that everybody can buy into, even if nobody is 100% happy with it. It's a simple arithmetical thing, the lowest common denominator, or you can go to the highest common denominator, but at least you need the lowest common denominator. Now, pushing it in the direction of sovereignty, Tamil sovereignty and federalism is only going to deadlock the whole thing. And it will play into the hands of southern extremism, which exists.
Now, if I may have not mistaken, a week ago, speaking in Parliament, Opposition Leader R. Sambandhan also made a special statement saying that the Tamil people have in fact set aside their idea of power devolution and a unitary and a state for themselves. In fact, they want to live as one Sri Lanka. And he even requested the assistance of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa to play a bigger role in terms of the functions of the country. What do you believe on that statement?
Well, I think that Mr. Sambandhan is a very experienced parliamentarian. I have great respect for him. I think he was very wise to request President Rajapaksa to support him. I think Mr. Sambandhan understands that Mahinda Rajapaksa wields something like a veto at the ground level. I mean, it's very simple. You can't have a North-South consensus without a South-South consensus. And you can't have a South-South consensus without Mahinda Rajapaksa. So, Mr. Sambandhan is being wise. But, I mean, the government can't harass Mahinda Rajapaksa's family and his supporters and haul him up before commissions and then expect him to support their ventures. I mean, no human being would do that. So they've got to make their mind up. If they want Mahinda Rajapaksa's support, or at least his neutrality, they have to learn to treat him with respect.
However, he has said that he will fully support the constitutional reforms.
No, he hasn't. He said he wants the executive presidency to be abolished. And on that issue, I disagree with him very strongly.
Why do you disagree?
Well, in the first place, he was executive president for 2 terms. He ran for 3rd term. He had a 2/3 majority and he did abolish the executive presidency. So when somebody who had the capacity to do that and didn't now says that it should be abolished, I tend to smile. That's point 1.
So what do you think his intentions are?
Well, I don't want to psychoanalyze him or, speculate, but I would say that he's quite wrong on this, because if the executive presidency is repealed, say tomorrow morning, we wake up tomorrow morning, there's no executive presidency. Maithripala Sirisena has either gone home to Polonnaruwa or is just loitering around for the next 4 years as a ceremonial president. What happens? What happens is that day after morning, you're going to have the special courts implementing the so-called Geneva Resolution. You're going to have the ECTA signed with India, where the IT sector of Sri Lanka will be opened up to India. You're going to have agreement on what the Indians call the Hanuman Bridge, linking Tamil Nadu and northern Sri Lanka. You're going to have the privatization of state enterprises in Sri Lanka, and you're going to have a constitution that will go in the direction of Austrian federalism. All of that is slowed down now and counterbalanced by the executive presidency, occupied by Maithripala Sirisena, the leader of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. I think that's a good thing. So if, as President Rajapaksa says, and as President Sirisena promises, and as Mr. Wickremesinghe hopes, the executive presidency is abolished, then you won't have a counterbalance to any of this. And I think we need a counterbalance.
So you are against the abolition of the
Oh,
executive
absolutely. I think we should not even talk about this. Now we have got the 19th Amendment. We have deflated the executive presidency. We have taken off the fat. It's liposuction. You've taken off this, the factor on the executive presidency. And that was only last year. Leave it alone. Don't touch it. Let's see how it works. You need a middle path. There's no point in going back to the Westminster model, the parliamentary system, which we had from 1947 to 1978. And it's during that time, I mean, my lifetime. It's during that time you had the race riots of 1958. I mean, you had single only in a parliamentary system. Single only would never have been passed under an executive presidency because you need the votes of all communities. I mean, even Mahinda Rajapaksa, under pressure from his own ranks, did not abolish the 13th Amendment. Why? Because he was executive president. But single only was under a parliamentary system. The 58 riots took place under a parliamentary system. The 1971 April insurrection and its repression took place under a parliamentary system. The Tamil New Tigers was formed in 1972 under a parliamentary system. The Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam was formed in 1976 under a parliamentary system. So, I'm saying, let's not go there again. We've been there, as Tony Blair once said, we've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Now, we've also had a top-heavy presidential system after 78, especially with the 18th Amendment. Now, what's the middle path? Let's do something new, which is neither this nor what we had, and the middle path is this slimmed down executive presidency post 19th Amendment. Independent commissions have already been set up. Let's try this out for another 15-20 years. So let's change the constitution, but let's change it on the north-south axis that we need to, that's the change we really need to make. Let's do that, and let's keep the issue of the executive presidency off limits. That's done. That was done last year with the 19th Amendment. Let's not go there again. It's a waste of time. Don't revisit that. If you do, you're removing the only umpire, the only referee that this system has. Because if you remove that, it's all power to the Prime Minister. And I don't care who the Prime Minister is. It could be President Mahinda Rajapaksa, whom I like and I support and I respect. I still don't want that. You, as a political scientist, I know that you need a power balance. And you need this counterweight. If not for the executive presidency, there's no breaks. Or if I change the metaphor, there's no umpire, there's no referee. And you need them.
Thank you, Dr. Jayatilaka. We'll be crossing over a short commercial break. We're in discussion with Dr. Jayatilaka, former diplomat and political analyst, on the proposed constitutional reforms. See you on the other side. Hello and welcome back to Vantage Point here on News. First, I am Shahin and we're joined by Dr. Jayatilaka, former diplomat and political analyst. We are discussing constitutional reforms in Sri Lanka. Dr. Jayatilaka, we were speaking about former President Mahinda Rajapaksa's role being played in terms of formulating the constitution. What do you think he should do from here on as the former president of Sri Lanka?
Well, I mean, he's obviously in politics. He was elected to parliament, and he should play the role that history expects of him. I mean, I don't think he should take a back seat. But I also disagree with what he said at Aberame.
But do you think he's, right now, as we speak, he's playing sort of a neutral role or, as you said, a laid-back role?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, he's, and I don't think he should. I mean, he's back in politics. I don't blame him for that. I mean, I was serving in France as ambassador, and I was sworn in as ambassador by President Sarkozy. When I left, it was President Hollande. And everybody thought that that was the end of Nicolas Sarkozy, especially because there were some allegations against him, maybe even a case or two.
Tax fraud, if I may.
That's right. And there he is, he's the leader of a new party. It's not really a new party, it's the same party, the Gaullist party, the center-right, the main center-right party called the UMP, but it's got a new name, it's called the Republicans. And he's leading it, and you have the far-right, Marine Le Pen, the National Front, and you have the socialist government of François Hollande. So, Sarkozy, former president, is back in the game. So I don't blame President Rajapaksa. I think there's still a lot of political mileage left in him, and I wish him well. I think he's in the political game, and he should stay there. And anybody who thinks that they can bypass him or cut him out of the action is in for a rude surprise. But I don't think he's on the right track in the speech that he gave at Aberame. I mean, that's not what
Why do you believe so, Dr. Jayatilaka?
Well, I told you, I don't believe that the issue of the executive presidency should be taken separately from the rest of the constitutional change and should be implemented immediately.
Yeah, because he did say so that constitutional reform should not be mixed up with the abolition of the executive presidency and electoral reform.
Well, I can understand his point, because the issue of the executive presidency can be used to divert attention from the rest of the constitutional reforms. So that point is okay. But there's another way of doing this. You don't have to bring the executive presidency in at all. That was attended to last year, including by his supporters, Vimal Veeravansa and others in parliament. Uday Gammanpila went to courts, and the 19th Amendment was the result. So the issue of the executive presidency is done. So you keep that out. You don't do that first and completely demolish the executive presidency. You just keep it out of the discussion, and you attend to the rest of the constitutional changes. That's point one. Point two is what he said about the 13th Amendment. Now he said, and here I agree with him, that we should not move beyond the 13th Amendment. But that he didn't stop there. He also said that land powers and police powers should be looked at. He also said that we should go by the Indian Constitution's provisions, which gives the central government more powers. Now, all of that may be true, But the question is, he had a 2/3 majority. Why didn't he do it himself? Now, I'm not saying he should have done it. I'm happy he didn't. But he didn't do it. If he didn't do it, he had good reasons. Though, Mr. Veerabansa, Mr. Champika Ranawaka, Uday Gammanpilla, and even, I believe, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, they were all for removing what they called the teeth, the poisonous fangs of the 13th Amendment. And President Rajapaksa said, no, I'm going ahead with the Northern Provincial Council election. Now, he was right. Why didn't he make the changes that he's now advocating then? The reason is, he was realistic enough to know two things. One, there would be no Tamil takers at all. Not even Douglas Devananda's party, which was allied to the government. Not even Karuna. Not even Thilen. That's one. Two, India would be antagonized. Seriously. So Mr. Rajapaksa's president was realistic enough. He didn't tamper with the 13th Amendment. He just didn't implement some of it. That's different from making it 13 minus. When you say don't go beyond, that's fine. But you also say you should look at this and that and do this and that and the other, you're really talking 13 minus. Now, if he wanted to do that, he should have done it then. He didn't do it then with good reason, and those reasons still hold. So I think he was wrong on what he said about the 13th Amendment at Abhyarame too. And the third thing is to do with elections. He said that with a new constitution there should be new elections. I understand why he's saying it. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. But of course, after the 1972 constitution and the 1978 constitution, there were no new elections. But there will be a new electoral system under this constitution, so okay, have a new election, that's also okay. But again, there's a problem, because if the SLFP is split and then they go for a new election, it's the UNP that's going to benefit. So if you take his three proposals, two of them, the top one, that is the immediate abolition of the executive presidency, only makes Mr. Wickremesinghe, the Prime Minister, more powerful. It's not Mahinda Rajapaksa who's going to take over from as the lead of the country if the executive presidency is abolished tomorrow. It's Mr. Wickremesinghe who's going to be more powerful. So it benefits the UNP, and the UNP will go in for elections with a stronger hand than it does now, because right now you have the SLFP leader who's the executive president. So that's one thing. And the third proposal, to have an election immediately after the constitution, there again, it can help the UNP unwittingly. Now, obviously, he doesn't want to help the UNP, he's anti-UNP. Now, the middle proposal, which is to do with the 13th Amendment, I don't think that helps anybody, except it's an echo of the hardline singular fundamentalists who have been anti-13th Amendment for a while. This is a fringe. It may be a growing fringe, because the government proceeding in the direction it's doing is only strengthening the singular fundamentalist right. It's happening. Allowing the British foreign minister to come here and talk about things that are purely internal to Sri Lanka. All of that just makes people mad. And when they get mad, they get fundamentalist and they get fanatical. In any society, Islamic, Hindu, whatever. So that's happening. But I don't think President Rajapaksa should kind of handle to that with this proposal concerning the 13th Amendment and, reducing powers, because if he wanted to, if that's such a good thing, he should have done it when he had a 2/3 majority.
What does it actually define? Because Minister Faisal Mustafa also mentioned that the term new constitution has been, in fact, eliminated, and it's just constitution.
Well, we don't know. We'll have to wait until the 26th, because Prime Minister Wickremesinghe and the TNA and Mr. Jayampati Wickramaratne, in their public pronouncements, by the TNA I mean Mr. Sumandaran, don't seem to be in any mood. They haven't given any signals that those amendments have been accepted. So, you have a budget where many revisions were made, but when the budget, what's in writing, is the same old budget. Right? So, verbally, we are told that yes, the amendments will be accepted, but I don't know until the 26th as we speak today, we don't know whether the UNP will actually accept those amendments. If they don't accept the amendments, well, that will be a problem. Frankly, if President Sirisena had not spoken on January 9th and he made the most statesman-like speech I have heard, though there are things in that speech that I disagree with as well, the most statesman-like speech I've heard in post-war Sri Lanka. But if he didn't speak on January 9th, and if it were only Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, this entire constitution-making exercise would have crashed and burned because he was beginning to fight with the JVP and the joint opposition was yelling at him, and it would have just adjourned in disarray. It was because President Sirisena, who remained stony-faced throughout, I was watching the live telecast, made this very statesman-like speech that we are even at the point we are at today, that something is rolling.
Dr. Jayathilaka, there is also a notion that Prime Minister Wickremesinghe is, I'll use my quote-unquote signals, authoritarian, how would say, exercise within the formulation of the constitution. What is your comment on that?
Well, I think that Prime Minister Wickremesinghe has an important role to play. Even people I disagree with, like Mangala Samaraweera, Chandrika, all of them, and they can contribute something, and they are contributing something. Of course, Mahinda Rajapaksa. All these people can contribute something. And Prime Minister Wickremesinghe does bring something to the table. But his problem is a kind of an ideological arrogance and dogmatism, and it's evident in his speeches. Now, when you introduce the idea of a new constitution, it's fairly basic that you need consensus. You need to be as nice as you possibly can. But if you start fighting with your own allies, the JVP, when you're making that speech, there's something, wrong there. Because you're not reaching out, you're trying to impose. I mean, he's not even fighting with the joint opposition. He did, but he made a personal remark against Anura Kumara Dissanayake. Now, that's not healthy. So, I would say that the problem with Prime Minister Wickremesinghe is not that he doesn't bring something of value. There's something that he can contribute. He has some interesting ideas. But he is what the Americans would call too far out in right field. Too far in one direction. President Sirisena is the one who holds the balance. He's trying to balance. He hasn't got it quite right, but you need him to balance this. Otherwise, all of these guys will fight each other. I mean, frankly, I think President Sirisena made a mistake in sending the SLP in with the UNP, but then again, I mean, maybe it's because the SLP is there in cabinet now that they are able to put the brakes on some of the more extremist ideas in the constitution-making project.
Extremist ideas?
Yes. The idea of Austria as a model for Sri Lanka, I mean, at the very least, I mean, it makes me laugh, I'm sorry, but as a political scientist, I mean, if you're looking at models, let's start with Asia, I mean, please. I mean, come on. Austria, it's a little corny. Now, that's an extremist idea. By extremist, I don't necessarily mean violent, but I mean it's like way out. It's like off the charts. Come on. You look at similar experiences. You look at the global south in the first place. I mean, you look at Asia. You look at the global south. I mean, you're not European. That's not your history. That's not your trajectory. I mean, you can learn from Europe. That's fine. But in terms of models, use the term model. Look, what's there to look at Austria about? I mean, come on. Now, that's the kind of extremism that can get this shot down in flames. I mean, look what happened when he was Prime Minister in 2001. It was one of the most short-lived Prime Ministerships. That's because of the same temperament of being too far out in right field or sort of too West-centric in his thinking. Now, if the Rajapaksas were too insular or too East-centric, Mr. Wickremesinghe is far too West-centric. At least we are in the East. I mean, if you want to be East-centric. The Rajapaksa administration was too close-minded. But Mr. Wickremesinghe sometimes forgets where we are located.
Dr. Jadalaka, going way back to our discussion, when I asked you about why Mahindra, if or not former President Mahindra Rajapaksa is playing a laid-back role or taking a back seat, it probably could be attributed to the fact that if you look at social media, he's being criticized for not speaking in Parliament but outside Parliament, as he was elected by the people from the electorate he contested from to represent them in Parliament. However, most often than not, he is not seen in Parliament. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I mean, look, he's one of the probably the most experienced and skillful politician we have. He may be defeated in an election, but this is a man who's been around the block several times. He was in Parliament as a very young MP in 1970. So he speaks in Parliament. He spoke during the budget debate on the defence fort. One has to see what he chooses to speak on. He spoke on defence. He spoke on the budget. And he's careful not to fall into the trap of a disciplinary inquiry. That's what I think. I don't know. He hasn't told me. But when he speaks, if he can't say something openly, he won't speak, because either he has to endorse something that he disagrees with, or and be subject to some kind of disciplinary inquiry, or he has to speak outside, which he does. So I think he's playing that one right. But
is it, would you call it right or safe?
Smart. That part of it he's doing smartly. But as I said, I disagreed with the politics, the political philosophy that made him make that speech, the ideology of the Aberrania speech. But that's, that's one speech. I hope he gets back on the right track.
Now, with an election looming,
is it looming?
Apparently so. Yesterday, a couple of days ago, we reported actually that rumors have circulated that former President Mahindra a new party is being formed under the leadership of former President Mahindra Rajapaksa. However, former President Mahindra Rajapaksa seems to be still remaining at a neutral position. What do you have to say about that?
Well, as I said, Mahindra Rajapaksa is a very smart guy. He's probably the smartest guy around in politics, and he's also certainly the toughest. I don't see him, I may be very wrong, but I don't see him burning his bridges with the SLFP. I mean, I was around when the chance really came with the election. And in fact, my point in that discussion was, well, maybe we should go it alone. This was after the Bring Back Mahindra movement. And then reunite with the SLFP in a coalition after the election. But I remember Mahindra Rajapaksa, that what he says, I've never left the SLFP, he means it. He means it. He feels it. That's what he is, because that's what his father was. His father was, together with SWRD, the two guys who crossed the floor and formed the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. But that's where he's coming from. So, he might probably split the difference. You might have a new party with his blessings. But I don't think he's going to be there, not only for tactical reasons, but he's an SLFP at heart. That's what I understand.
But do you not believe that move itself could cause a certain element of divisions within the SLFP?
Oh my God, it will split the SLFP, especially at the grassroots. Now, the main fault for that, I'm afraid, would be President Sirisena, because as he knows better than I, the SLFP was founded for a particular purpose, and that was to counterbalance what was seen as a too pro-Western minoritarian UNP going back to the 1950s. Now, this year is the 60th anniversary of the 1956 victory. Now, when you take a party like that, and you tie it to the tail of the elephant, the UNP, then something is bound to happen. I mean, you can't expect that to be cost-free. There's bound to be some kind of a reaction. Now, if President Sirisena wants to prevent that, then as the leader of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, he has to be seen by his party, its grassroots, its voters and the country to oppose certain things that the UNP government is doing that are wrong and that go against the tradition of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, what the Sri Lanka Freedom Party stands for. For instance, excessive movement in a federal direction in the constitution, special courts to try the army, things like that. If he is not seen to stop it, if he is not seen to take a stand as the leader of the SLFP, then that role is going to be played by somebody within the SLFP or outside the SLFP. The JVP is not doing it, so it will probably be within and outside the SLFP. So this is really President Sirisena's decision to make. And he hasn't really been able to find loyalists who can do that for him. I mean, the people who are with him are people who didn't succeed in winning the preference vote during the August 2015 election. I mean, either President Sirisena has to reach out to new people in the SLFP, I mean, new faces, not necessarily young, in the opposition, and form a new centrist kind of a platform. There's a possibility of doing that because his speech on January 9th, he talked about social democracy, 21st century social democracy. It's not Prime Minister Wickremesinghe's line, it's a different line. Now it's possible. Now, can he do that? Will he do it? If he does it, he can either prevent a breakaway or he can minimize the impact of that breakaway. But if he does not, and he's just dragged in the wake of Mr. Wickremesinghe's policies, then inevitably, as a reaction, you will have some kind of breakaway movement, and what is really problematic about it is that such a breakaway may not be a social democratic or moderately progressive party, which it should be. It may be a singular ultra-nationalist party as a backlash against what the UNP is doing. But who's going to suffer? President Sirisena and the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. So, it's a very complicated situation. Personally, I am not for the formation of a new opposition party at this point of time. There's a reason for it. If it were being done, it should have been done when the Bring Back Mahinda movement was at a peak. And I was for that. They didn't do it. Or it could have been done on yet another occasion when the SLFP went into coalition with Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. It didn't happen then. Now, they were in that coalition after August 2015. Now, right now, the SLFP is inching away from Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. That's in all the Sunday papers. Now, that's the wrong time to break up the SLFP. That's not the time to break up the SLFP.
Dr. Jatilka, this may seem as an obvious question, but probably my last question as well. Let's say the executive presidency was abolished. Let's say the constitution was put out. Let's say former President Mahinda Rajapaksa formed a new party under his leadership. This takes me back to my first question when I started the program. Will it change the political landscape in Sri Lanka?
Completely, and for the worse.
Why do you say for the worst?
Well, I've explained why I think that the executive presidency is a necessary counterweight. And I admire the countries that have those presidencies. If you take the Security Council, of the 5 permanent members, 4, apart from Britain, have presidencies. And very diverse countries. The United States, China, France, Russia. 4 out of 5. And of those 4, I mean, if you take countries that have had progressive ideas, revolutions and so on, not just leftist, but if you take the liberal democratic revolutions, the United States and France, they have presidential systems. That's not an accident.
Okay.
If you take the communist revolutions, Russia and China, they have presidential systems. So it's a vehicle for modernity. So I am for the retention of the executive presidency as we have now, together with the independent commissions, which came with the 19th Amendment. I'm saying freeze it like that. If you abolish it, the balance will go. It's the worst thing that can happen anywhere, in a marriage, in a country, in a constitution. You need a balance. So I'm opposed to that. If that happens, it will uncork all the ideas, what I've called extremist, that Prime Minister Wickremesinghe has, of westernization, foreignization. I mean, culturally I'm pretty westernized myself, but the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration forgot where we were. They forgot that we were just 19 miles from India. They thought we were close to China, I mean geographically. We were not. Somebody should have taken a look at a map. Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe makes the same mistake, but at least Mahinda Rajapaksa knew that we were in Asia. Mr. Wickremesinghe thinks that we are in Europe, or that we are Puerto Rico, a state of the United States. So all those ideas will be implemented without the executive presidency, and that will cause a revolution in this country, and it won't be the kind of revolution that I would think is a nice one.
Okay, Dr. Jajal,
it will be an ultra-nationalist.
I may have to cut your answer short there, but I'll ask you 3 quick questions. I want
three. Okay.
3 quick questions.
Go.
Yes or no? Constitutional reforms, yes or no?
Reform, yes. New constitution, no.
Abolition of the executive presidency, yes or no?
No.
New party under the leadership of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, yes or no?
Depends.
I'm going to leave it at that. Well, that's all we have from here on Vantage Point. I've been Shahinj Rampati. Until next week, we have Dr. Raja Antilaka. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Shahin.
And take care.